There's a particular kind of tiredness that has nothing to do with work. It comes from people. The colleague who turns every meeting into a battle. The relative who knows exactly which button to press. The friend who makes everything about themselves. You can do everything else right. Sleep well, plan your day, stay calm, and still have the whole thing hijacked by 90 seconds with their mood becomes your mood. Their behaviour rents space in your head for hours after I've had days where one short conversation affected me more than hours of work. Nothing dramatic happened, yet I kept replaying it long after the other person had moved on. Today I want to talk what the Stoics understood about difficult. The strange thing is, their advice starts before you've even met anyone, before you've got out of bed. Marcus Aurelius began some of his days by writing himself a warning. It's a startling thing for an emperor to write. He told himself, in effect, today, I'm going to meet people who are meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, and difficult. He listed it out, deliberately, first thing. At first, I found this approach bleak. I thought starting a day like this would make me guarded or suspicious. Over time, I began to see it as a less negatively and more as preparation. Marcus was removing the element of surprise. Most of our anger at other people is not made entirely from their behaviour. Much of it comes from the shock of their behaviour. It comes from the gap between what we expected and what we got. You expected the colleague to be reasonable, and they weren't. The collision between your expectation and reality knocks you sideways. Marcus understood that if he expected difficulty in advance, if he walked into the day already knowing some people would be hard work, then it could not ambush him. He had already made room for it. I've noticed this in myself. When I enter a conversation expecting perfect fairness, the smallest sign of stubbornness feels insulting. When I accept that that person might be defensive or unreasonable, I stay steadier. The rude driver, the sharp email, the relative's digs. None of it holds the same power over a mind that has already accepted people as sometimes like this. So that is the first move, and it is simple. Stop being surprised. This is not pessimism, it is preparation. People will occasionally be difficult. That is not the universe malfunction. That is a Tuesday. When I remind myself of this at the start of the day, I do not become passive. I become less reactive. I waste less energy asking why someone is behaving exactly as people sometimes behave. When you stop expecting everyone to be reasonable all the time, their unreasonableness loses much of its power to derail you. But the Stoics went further, and this next part is harder to swallow. They ask you to try and understand where the difficult person is coming from. Almost nobody wakes up thinking today, I will be a terrible person. The difficult people in your life mostly believe that they are in the right. They act from their own view of things, a view shaped by their fears, their history, their insecurities, and the version of the story they tell themselves. The colleague who is combative might be frightened of being incompetent. The relative criticises might believe they are helping. Marcus put it starkly, people do wrong because they think it is right, or because they cannot tell the difference. I have found this difficult to remember in the moment. When someone is rude to me, my first instinct is rarely to investigate their inner world. My first instinct is to defend myself. Yet when I pause, I often see fear, embarrassment, or insecurity behind the behaviour. They are not usually villains in their own minds. They are doing the best thing they know how to do with the perception they have. Sometimes that perspective is narrow, wounded, or wrong. Understanding someone is not the same as excusing them. It does not mean their behaviour is acceptable. It does not mean you must accept poor treatment. What it does is take someone of the personal sting out of the encounter. When you see someone's difficult from their own limitation, fear, or insecurity, it stops feeling like a carefully designed attack on you. It begins to look like what it usually is, a person struggling within themselves, in your direction. I once knew someone whose constant criticism felt personal. I assumed they were trying to undermine me. Later, I began to notice how anxious they became whenever they felt ignored or uncertain. Their criticism was often an attempt to regain control. That did not make their behaviour fair, but it made it easier for me to stop absorbing every comment as a verdict of my own worth. There is a bigger idea underneath all this that I find deeply moving. The Stoics believed humans are being made for each other. We are built to cooperate, the way hands, eyes, or a row of teeth work together. Marcus said that being angry at people or turning away from them as enemies works against our own nature. The default setting is that people are the enemy. It is the opposite. This idea has challenged me because annoyance makes separation feel natural. When someone frustrates me, I want to reduce them with the worst thing they did. Stoicism asks me to remember that they are still human, even while I disagree with them. Most people, most of the time, are not out to get you. They are moving through their lives, sometimes clumsily, and sometimes in a way that catches you. Now let me address the loud modern answer to all this, because it is everywhere and it is almost the opposite of the Stoic one. The internet's advice on difficult people is often simple. Cut them off. Toxic. Narcissist. Protect your energy. Go no contact. Sometimes that response is right, and I will come to that, but as a reflex for everyone who annoys you, it is a disaster. I have felt the temptation to label someone instead of dealing with the complexity of relationships. A label offers instant certainty. It also makes it easier to stop examining my own reactions. If your response to every difficult person is to burn the bridge, you will eventually burn every bridge. You will start mistaking a low tolerance for other humans for strong boundaries. That is not peace. It is a smaller and smaller world, with you alone in the middle of it, convinced everyone else was the problem. I do not want a peaceful life that depends on everyone agreeing with me. I want the kind of peace that survives disagreement, awkwardness, and imperfect people. The Stoic path is harder and better. It is this: protect your peace without hardening your heart. This brings us to the one thing in all of this that is yours. You cannot control the difficult person. You cannot make them feel reasonable, force them to understand, or argue them into being kind. Their behaviour belongs. Your response belongs to you. That is where your power lives. You decide whether their bad mood becomes your bad mood. You decide whether their provocation earns a reaction. You decide whether you carry the encounter around for the rest of the day or set it down. This has been one of the hardest lessons for me. I used to think replaying an argument would help me solve it. Most of the time, I was just extending the argument in my own head after the other person had left. The difficult person controls their behaviour. You control what it costs you. Much of the exhaustion comes less from what they did and more from how long you continue to hold it afterwards. So let me make this practical. First, do the morning mood. Expect it. You do not need to recite the whole grim list. Give yourself a quiet acknowledgement as you start the day. I might meet someone difficult today. That is normal. I do not have to let it ruin me. I've started using a simpler version of this before stressful meetings or family gatherings. I remind myself that someone might misunderstand me, interrupt, or say something irritating. The reminder keeps the first movement of tension from feeling like an emergency. You are preparing yourself for the surprise. Second, when someone is being difficult, ask what is driving it. Do not ask to excuse them, ask to understand them. What might this person be afraid of? What story are you trying to tell themselves, in which they are the reasonable one? I often ask myself whether the person is trying to protect their pride, status, control, or sense of safety. I do not always get the answer right, but the question itself stops me from reacting blindly. A person's power over you often becomes smaller once you see the frightened or limited human underneath. Third, respond from your values, not from their provocation. You do not have to match their energy. Someone being unreasonable is not an instruction for usable in return. You decide who you are in exchange, regardless of who they are being. I've walked away from conversations proud of the point but disappointed by the way I made it. Winning the exchange meant little when I acted like someone I did not respect. The calmest person in a difficult conversation is often the person who has the most power. Calm gives, anger narrows them. Fourth, this is the boundary and it matters. Understanding people does not create a duty to tolerate average. Some people are harmful, not merely annoying. For those people, distance is not a failure of it is wisdom. The Stoic is not a doormat. You can limit your exposure to someone, keep a relationship at arm's length, say a firm no, or walk away entirely. You can do all of it without hatred, contempt, or bitterness. I once had to limit contact with someone who's leaving me tense and depleted. I explained what I would no longer accept. Then I stopped entering the same circular argument. I did not insult them or try to punish them. I changed my access, not my humanity. That distinction matters. You can protect yourself from someone without poisoning yourself with resentment toward boundaries with peace, not boundaries with war. Here is where it lands. Difficult people are not. There is no version of your life where everyone around you is reasonable and kind all the time. A life spent waiting for that or raging because you did not get it. Because I have wasted time wishing certain people would become. It rarely changed them. It mostly kept my peace dependent on decisions they had no intention of making. The Stoics offer something better than a world of difficult people, because that world does not exist. They offer you a self that difficult people cannot wreck so easily. A self that expects them, understands them, sets boundaries where needed, refuses to be dragged down to their level or carry them around all day. You will still meet the meddling, the ungrateful and the arrogant. Marcus did every single day, and he ran an empire full of them. The goal was never to make them disappear, it was to meet them, deal with them, protect yourself where needed, and refuse to hand over your peace. That is the part I kept returning to. I do not need every person to behave well before to have a good day. Their behaviour matters, but it does not get the final decision. Let them be difficult. You do not have to become difficult in return, and you do not have to let this cost your day. If someone came to mind while you listened, start there. Stay a while if this helped. There is more every week on Living Quietly in a